I challenge you to a duel.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Movie Duel podcast. On each episode of the Movie Duel podcast, myself and my co-host pick a subject that's based around movies, and then each of us pick a film that we think best fits that subject. The only rule being that we cannot pick a film that has already been discussed on the podcast. And this time around, myself and movie duelist Vanessa are discussing our choices for the best film based on a toy line. But before we get into that, just a few quick points of order for this episode. First of all, just a few thanks to people who retweeted or reposted our announcement on the last episode. So those thanks this time around go to Ben from Filmbusters, Jeff Brandon Warner, the guys over at Creative Psychopaths, Paul from Filmbusters, and Stephen Mark over at Movie Drone. Thank you very much, guys. And thanks to anybody who liked or commented on any of the posts surrounding the last episode. And thanks to anybody who voted in the poll for our last episode. Obviously, I was joined by Jamie Russell, and we talked our choices for the most underrated Sam Raimi film. My choice of Darkman and Jamie's The Quick and the Dead. We put it to the polls, and just by a reasonable hair, 6 votes to 4, Jamie won that poll. So it was decided by you people that The Quick and the Dead was the more underrated Sam Raimi film. Obviously, please get onto the polls this time around. It should go out either the day after the episode drops or pretty soon after that. It was a bit of an accident last time. It was only up for a day. But this time around we'll try and make sure that it gets there and is posted for a full week. But please feel free to get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our choices for this episode. You can do that in a variety of different ways. You can contact us on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Movie Duel podcast. You can contact us on Twitter or follow us at Movie Duel Pod. And you can also email us at movieduelpodcast@gmail.com. And please, if you do get the opportunity to do so, whatever podcast platform you listen to us on, just like and give us a rating and review. It helps us sort of get new listeners. And then just a couple of notes about this episode. Please make sure that you listen towards the very end. There's a very special announcement that's made by myself and Vanessa about an exciting new project that we're both involved in. So listen to the end of the episode for that. And also the usual warnings that there will be spoilers for both films. And there is very much going to be some strong language throughout. So without further ado, we'll head on over to the main episode.
Where does he get those wonderful toys?
Okay, so welcome back to Vanessa. Vanessa, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm not too bad. Not too bad at all. Looking forward to this subject. I'm a big kid at heart, so talking about films that are based around toys is like heaven to me. But before we get into that, what you been up to? Anything interesting lately?
I'm going to Fright Fest on Friday, so that's quite exciting. Although not there yet. No, you know when people ask you what you've been up to, and you know you've been busy, but you go, I can't actually think what I've been doing. So I'll tell you what I've seen at the cinema, because that's easier. Because I've seen, I think since the last time we spoke, I've seen Indiana Jones, is it the Dial of Destiny?
Yeah.
It was ages ago now, actually, but it's been a while since we spoke. And I've seen Oppenheimer not long after it came out. I saw Barbie last week.
Did you not do the double bill?
Nah, do you know what? I had no interest in doing that. And see, now that I've seen Oppenheimer, I really wouldn't have wanted to go into another film. I don't think straight after that. Like, it was 3 hours long, and I just felt, nah. I think I was quite happy seeing them in isolation. And also, Barbie at my local cinema was selling out for about 2 weeks. solid, and it was all
Wow.
young girls, and I just was like, I don't want to be in a cinema with a crowd of young girls that are going to be shrieking and playing on their phone. That sounds terrible, but you know what? You know how you see younger folk and you just assume they're going to like behave badly. So I was just like, I'm waiting until this film's quiet. And the other one I've seen is Talk to Me.
Well, that's like you know, when you're getting close to that dreaded sort of 40, Vanessa, that you're starting to do those kind of things. Think about the effect that the younger generation are going to have on your experiences.
I know it's terrible, and
it's like when you realise you're in a supermarket and you're looking at the strength of the rubbish bags to see which one's better. That's when you know you're starting to get old.
I know. And do you know the thing is, it's actually really good in a way because it means cinemas have been really busy, and they've been busy with original things. Like even when I went to see Talk to Me, the horror movie, it was really busy. And seeing cinemas busy for stuff that's original, that's not like part of the Marvel universe or that's not a sequel or whatever, is actually really, really nice. So I've enjoyed all my trips to the cinema over the summer. Oppenheimer was amazing. It was really good considering, because I was a wee bit like, 3 hours is a long time. I like a 90-minute movie, so 3 hours to me is like, but it went in so quickly. It was fantastic. And I really enjoyed Barbie, although maybe not quite as much as I thought I would.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to sort of convince my daughter to go and see Barbie because I'm really interested in seeing it, but she wanted to go and see Elemental, which was the new Pixar film, which was...
Oh, yeah, I've heard that's pretty good.
Yeah, it was sort of, you know, I don't think really Pixar have made a bad film at all, and this certainly wasn't a bad film, but it wasn't the best. It was pretty akin to what they've done before, really. But it was an interesting, you know, it's like anything, it's got a moral to it, and it's got its funny moments, and it was fine, really. It was just didn't really blow me away, but my daughter loved it and was very excited, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, Barbie's the type of film that, like, if you catch it on streaming, it'll still be good. Oppenheimer, I think, is quite good if you can see it in the cinema, just because of like the scope of it and stuff. But I think Barbie, it wouldn't matter seeing it in the on a small screen. I don't think you would lose anything necessarily.
But it certainly wasn't enough to make you change your choice for this podcast.
No, and I was thinking about that because I've actually seen 2 films recently based on toys that were new. This Barbie, and Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves, which I know that you have seen.
Yes.
And me and my husband watched that recently. Quite annoyingly, we paid to rent it, and then a few days later it appeared on Paramount, which we actually have. So that was a bit annoying, but actually really enjoyed it. Thought it was really good fun, a really good weekend adventure movie, and but thoroughly enjoyed that, actually, much more than I thought I would.
And also since we last spoke, we've both sort of ventured out into the world of podcasting.
Yes.
We've both guested on the Creative Psychopaths podcast, which I've talked about. I discussed Kill This with them, and your episode was released with them last week for David Fincher's Seven. And I believe you've got another one coming up, or you've recorded another one.
Yeah, recorded one yesterday with a horror movie, Maniacs. So I'm not entirely sure when it'll be out, but I think it'll be within the next kind of few weeks. But I'll share it on the Facebook group when that is out. So
excellent. And what were you discussing on the one?
The Witches. It's Nicholas Roeg, isn't it? Yeah, it's Nicholas Roeg. Which is, I just think it's one of the greatest kids horror movies, and it's actually quite an interesting movie to talk about as well. There's quite a lot to talk about in it that you don't necessarily pick up when you're watching it, but so yeah, that was really good fun. So I will let everyone know when that's available to listen to.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get into the subject then. So it was your choice this time round. Obviously, last time we were talking worst horror movie remake, which, according to the polls on Twitter, you knocked out of the park, and everybody voted for The Wicker Man over my choice of Rob Zombie's Halloween, so congratulations to you. And so it fell to you to pick the subject this time around. So just tell the listeners what you picked this time around.
I picked the best movie based on a toy or toy line. Yeah. Bit of a mouthful.
So this had to be a film that was had to be based on a toy rather than something that was a comic book then turned into a toy then turned into a film. So it had to be a toy first and foremost before anything else. Yeah. Excellent. So assembled a couple of little facts here for films based around toy lines. The first was considered to be the first film based on a toy line is Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure in 1977. That's as the doll was an inspiration for a book series, but it was a doll before it was the book series. So it could be considered as the first film to be based on a toy line. And interestingly enough, the Raggedy Ann doll is actually the type of doll that the real life Annabelle is. Sort of red hair, red nose,
Right.
and the real one that's kept in a box somewhere really obscure. I don't know where that is, but and the most successful or the highest grossing film that's based on a toy line is Transformers Dark of the Moon from 2011, which took just over 1.1 billion at the worldwide box office. And it was actually closely followed by Transformers Age of Extinction in 2014, which only took about 20 million less. So, as it was your choice of subject, it fell to me to pick first this time round. And actually, a Transformers film was one of the ones that I considered, and it was very close to changing my my choice on this one, because the 1984 cartoon movie that was released theatrically, or Transformers the movie as it was known, was in close consideration for this. And the main reason I didn't pick that was because I was more of a Masters of the Universe fan when I was a kid, as opposed to Transformers. I did love Transformers, but not as much as Masters of the Universe. So my choice for this episode is Masters of the Universe from 1987.
At the far end of the universe, there is a planet ruled by a being of utter evil. And there is only one man who dares challenge him. They are locked in a battle to the death. A battle that will take them across the heavens.
Stop him!
A battle that will finally be fought
I want them hunted down and brought to me!
across the face
Police! Nobody move!
of Earth.
I think I'm gonna need some backup.
Can you show us the way?
No!
Somebody help me!
Julie!
From a distant galaxy, they have come to Earth. Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. Frank Langella as Skeletor. Only they have the powers to be Masters of the Universe. Live the adventure.
So directed by Gary Goddard, starring Dolph Lundgren, Frank Langella, John Cypher, Chelsea Field, Billy Barty, Courtney Cox, Robert Duncan McNeil, and Meg Foster. So, as I said, I was a big He-Man fan when I was a kid. I used to watch the cartoon. I had a ton of the toys. They were sort of gifted to me by a friend of the family who'd sort of outgrown his toys, and I got the big Castle Grayskull, loads of the figures, the Battle Cat, and everything to do with He-Man, and the whole Masters of the Universe toy range. So it was a big part of my life, and it's muscle men and swords and sorcery and all that sort of stuff. It was just what I was into when I was a young man. So this was probably the first sort of film that I saw that was based on something that I was really into as a kid. This was before Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, before things like Super Mario that came out and ended up being shit anyway. But this was something I was really passionate about, really looking forward to seeing. There was a live action He-Man movie. Before we get into that, a little bit of fact about the toys. The Masters of the Universe toy line was created by Mattel in 1981. It consisted of a collection of action figures with accompanying accessories, vehicles, and playsets. And the line was supported by an animated series, which was my first introduction before I got load of the toys and stuff like that, by Filmation, who made a lot of these kind of tie-in cartoons. This was an era of toys being made, and then the promotional tools were made afterwards. So things like comic books, cartoons, just regular storybooks and things like that all came after the toys were invented or the toys were made. And they were extremely well received. They sold for, the next 6 years, and they were top of a lot of the lists for toy lines, with several different waves of releases. And we're a similar age, Vanessa. Do you remember these toys knocking about when you was younger?
I don't remember the toys. I remember He-Man, the cartoon, and I remember watching it, but not being a massive fan, probably because it was more aimed at, not that these things should be gendered, but it was more aimed at boys than it was at girls. And
yeah.
I wasn't a girly girl, so I did, I love things like Thundercats. Thundercats was probably the same time, I think, roughly. And I've definitely got more nostalgia and memories with Thundercats and the figures in Thundercats and what I do with He-Man. But I remember, at primary school, a lot of the boys in the class being upset, just running about and shouting about Grayskull and stuff. Just so even though I wasn't really into it, I was very aware, and I've definitely seen the cartoon He-Man. I don't know when that was popular. Would that have been the late 80s, early 90s? Or
83 it started, but it ran 2 seasons, but it was 100 and something. It was two big seasons of cartoons that just ran and repeat.
I maybe caught them on a repeat then, because I was born in 1984, and I don't really remember anything probably until, I don't know, till maybe I was 5 or 6. So you're talking about going into the 90s. But so it was maybe on repeat that I was watching it, but it was very big. Funnily enough, I had never heard of this movie until you mentioned it. My husband remembered it very well. He was into He-Man when he was young, and he watched it with me the other night, and he loved it. But I think he had a lot more childhood memories related to He-Man and stuff than I did. But I honestly wasn't even aware of this movie.
Well, the toy line actually saved Mattel in a way, because Mattel had a few years before turned down the chance to make toys for Star Wars. So that was a massive misstep for them in the end. I knew it probably was a risk, and they didn't take it, but it put them right at the top of toy makers, really. This whole range. There was actually an urban legend that the toys were originally conceived as toys to accompany the Conan the Barbarian film.
Oh, right.
But that's a load of twaddle, basically.
Right.
They were the the source material for Conan, so the original books, I think it was, or comic books, spurred on the idea for one of the creators of the toy line, about, you know, having big muscly guys and swords and shit like that, basically. But I'm not going to talk too much now about the toys, other than recommending a couple of documentaries. There's, I believe, it's on Netflix, called The Toys That Made Us.
Okay.
It's great little documentary that they do episodes on Barbie, Lego, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and there is one on Masters of the Universe as well, which is really interesting to listen to. And there's also a documentary which is currently available on YouTube called The Power of Grayskull, which goes through the entirety of the Masters of the Universe legacy, basically. So the original toys, the cartoon series, the film, the later sort of iterations of He-Man in toys and things like that. And it's a really fascinating documentary. A lot of disagreements in the early years of the creating of the toys and stuff. So I would recommend going to watch those. But the film obviously came along 1987 and was unfortunately a critical and commercial failure. It grossed 17 million worldwide against a budget of 22 million, and actually led to the end of the production company Cannon Films, along with Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. They basically put all their money into those two films in the hopes of them being successes and financing a Spider-Man film as early as 1989, and that didn't come to fruition because of those two films. And I'm not going to sit here and say that this is the greatest film ever made, or anything like that, because I realise that this film has its problems. Not just because of the time it was made, but it went through some difficulties while it was being filmed as well, which I'm sure we'll get into. But for me, it was just, you know, at this sort of age, I mean, I must have been probably 8, 9 when I first saw the film. I wouldn't have seen it at the cinema. I definitely don't remember seeing it at the cinema. So it would have been a couple of years after it initially came out that I would have seen it. But, you know, for me at that age, this was just heaven. You know, it's got sort of monsters in it. It's got action and, you know, science fiction elements to it. For me, like I said, I'm a big kid. You know, it still has that charm for me, even now. Even it's a good while since I watched it last, and watching it again the other night. It just took me back completely. I was like giddy when the theme started up and everything, because despite everything, I think it's got a great score to it, this film. It's very sort of Superman-esque, very John Williams-esque in places, and it's just a whole heap of fun. I mean, I still love it as much as I did then. How did you find it as a first-time viewing?
To begin with, I was a bit like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But I think I thought the entire movie was going to be based in, and I've written down, what's the world that they're in?
Eternia.
Eternia.
Yeah.
I did write it somewhere in my notes. And I thought the whole thing was going to be based there, and I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get into this. But then when I realised that actually a large chunk, probably the majority of the movie was actually set in quote marks, the real world, I was more kind of invested in it.
Yeah. Because
I quite like any kind of fish out of water type things, you know. So that whole trope is just a trope that I quite enjoy. So as soon as I realised that was going to happen, I kind of got more into it. And yeah, when I got to the end, I was like, yeah, I did actually really enjoy that. It reminded me of things like Bill and Ted, maybe a little bit. Elements of Lord of the Rings. Some of the kind of like more kind of swashbuckling stuff, like maybe like Princess and the Bride, that kind of thing. So there was quite a few things that reminded me of that I really like, and
It's very 80s in its sensibility and not just its look. It feels like an 80s film, definitely.
And let's be honest, who doesn't love an 80s film? So, yeah, I did really enjoy it. I loved the kind of old-fashioned special effects and the fact that things were, were done differently. I loved the fact that Courtney Cox was in it, which I didn't know. Like, I only knew that. So what I did was, just before I started watching it, I had a quick look at IMDb just to take some notes about who was in it and the director and stuff. And I was like, oh, Courtney Cox is in it. Is it her first film?
I couldn't quite figure it out. It was either a first or a second. She has got a sort of movie credit. She's got a movie credit for the same year. But whether that was filmed before or after, I don't know.
Right. So I know she was in a Bruce Springsteen video. I can't remember which one, but
Dancing in the Dark.
Yes. And that was fairly early on in her career, I think.
I agree, I think.
Right, so that was quite a bit before this. But Courtney Cox is a familiar face. Like, folk around our age, I suppose, mostly know her from things like Friends, Scream, and Ace Ventura. I always remember her from as well.
She's still got her own face in this one as well.
And yeah, she looks quite different, doesn't she, to how she looks today. But, so that was quite fun. And like I said, when I realised part of it was going to be based kind of in our world, and I like Frank Langella. Have you ever seen The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp?
Yeah.
Now, I know Roman Polanski is a problematic director, right? But I'm just going to put that to the side because everybody talked about that at length. I really like The Ninth Gate. Actually, Johnny Depp's kind of problematic as well, but again, I'm just not got the time to go into that, right? So, but if you put that to the side, I actually really, really like The Ninth Gate, and Frank Langella plays like a really creepy character in that film. But I wouldn't have known it was him if I hadn't looked at IMDb before the film started, because he's in so much makeup, and I think his makeup and stuff was brilliant, even though it was kind of crappy.
Let's go through the cast, because I haven't done this for a while on one of my choices, and sort of going through the cast. I think that's probably the easiest way to go through this film. So we'll start at the top with the main man, Dolph Lundgren as He-Man. I mean, he doesn't have a whole heap to do here other than look good in a cape and a pair of pants, and swing a sword around, really. And he's still got that Swedish accent as well. At this point, he's not sort of become fully Americanized. A little bit wooden, I suppose, but I think he suits the role. He looks the part for definite, and he's not knocking anything out of the park, but he's doing the job. And despite the fact that he's running around this sort of suburb of LA, I think it is, in his pants, nobody's really batting an eyelid. It's only Detective Lubick, who we'll get onto, who sort of calls it out. But he's gone on record as saying that he didn't enjoy the film, or he thought it was a bit shit. But he now sort of considers it, an important film for the fan base that it's got, and it's obviously sort of gained a cult following. But yeah, I think he's fine in this role. Mattel actually sort of ordered that He-Man not kill anybody in this film, and it was important that he doesn't. He said he absolutely cannot kill anybody because this is meant to be a kids' film, which is why the army of Skeletors are all robots. None of them are humans, and that's how they sort of managed to get around that, because that is something that they took liberties with from both the cartoon and the toy line. There weren't minions of robots and things.
They were like stormtroopers. That's what.
Yeah.
Race was kind of stormtrooper.
But yeah, we'll get straight. You've already sort of mentioned him, but we'll get straight into him. Easily the best part of this film, I think he is fucking amazing. Frank Langella as Skeletor. It's, for the type of film this is, I would hand on heart say that he's probably one of the best villains of the 80s.
bold statement there.
It is, but I just think he is because he's, you know, and if you watch any of those documentaries that I just talked about, and he talks so fondly about this film, he'd signed on to this film without seeing a script, without knowing what He-Man, without knowing what Masters of the Universe are, anything like that. He signed on to it immediately when it got offered to him, purely because he knew that his son liked He-Man, and his son couldn't watch any of his films because of the subject matter. So he basically took it because of that. He you know, he said his son would run around the house shouting, you know, I have the power and all that sort of stuff. And that was the reason that he took it. And it was always one of those performances that really sort of unnerved me when I was younger, because it does look really, you know, although it's a big leap away from the toy line and the cartoon, it's, you know, it's really quite frightening, I think, the makeup. I mean, it loses a little bit when you're looking at, you know, high definition versions of this film, because you can sort of see that the nose is a bit of fabric kind of thing. But other than that, it was still fascinating to me watching it, you know, 30 years later nearly. It just looks incredible. And he actually, again, you know, just nipping back into that documentary, he talks about how he was really proud of his body at the time, and he expected it to be, because the original cartoon and the toy were, you know, just sort of muscle men, and they all had the same body and, you know, abs and pecs and all that sort of thing. And he expected to be the costume to be very much like that, so it worked out. But the director was like, "No, we're going down a different route." And he has some pretty epic lines in this film as well, I think. A lot of them he actually came up with himself, and he sort of ad-libbed them on set. There's even the Shakespeare quote. I forget which one it's from, but I'm not in a giving vein today. And he came up with the line, is the loneliness of good equal to the loneliness of evil? It's my best Skeletor voice. Excuse me. But yeah, he just holds it through the whole film. He's just you just relishing those moments that he turns up on screen, and you know, it just looks so imposing. He gets this sort of glow up towards the end of the film as well, where he's looking like, you know, he's got his gold headdress and full of the powers of the universe and everything else. And I think it's just a shame for the ending, really, of this film, because he doesn't get the epic sort of showdown with He-Man that was intended. And the reason for that is that they filmed up to the point where they start to fight, and then the Canon film company basically said, "That's it, stop. You've got no more money. Stop filming." So they had to sort of talk them round. The amount of money that they got to film the final battle, they basically had to do it in a small warehouse, and because you can see there's a very clear cut before they start fighting, and it goes to this sort of blurry, completely different set, and it's just it is quite disappointing, that final battle. Yeah, but that was just, you know, that was just down to the money and the money people. All the way through the film, I think it's just a great, stellar performance, really, from Frank Langella. Especially, you know, he's acting through heavy makeup as well, and it still manages to pay off.
Yeah, I thought he was brilliant. And like I said, the only thing I'd really seen him in was The Ninth Gate, and I think he's brilliant as a baddie in that as well. But his whole kind of presence when he's on screen, I thought he was brilliant. And I really liked his makeup as well, even though, as you say, like when you watch it now, you can maybe see bits that aren't perfect. I think that there's something I really like about kind of 80s, 90s kind of like makeup, and, you know, rather than special effects or some of the stuff that people have now, I think it's more effective.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think you can appreciate, especially as you get older, you can appreciate the work that's gone into those kind of makeups as well. But yeah, then you've got again. You touched on Courtney Cox as Julie. I mean, it's fine. It's a fine performance. It does what it needs to. She does what she needs to in the film. A little bit annoying in places, especially when she gives away the key.
Yeah.
Mum who's dead. It's like, come on. Oh, can you not get with the program? There's weird people knocking about, and Mum suddenly turns up. Anyway, and you do get this very sort of sickly ending to the film as well, where her parents come back from the dead. But the less
they go back? They go back in time, don't they? So when they come back to before the plane crash. Yeah, but I mean, I found the whole thing about like quite early on when you meet Courtney Cox's character Julie. Her mum and dad were killed in a plane crash, and I was a bit like, why? Like, why is that necessary? And then, like you said, it leads into this. I don't know, that the film would have worked just as well, I think, without having that detail and without having that kind of sickly ending. Like, you didn't know the character well enough to feel sorry for her.
Well, I think it serves that purpose that when Evil Lynn turns into a mum and she gives her the key and things like that, but it still didn't need that at the end, and it reminded me of we've already talked about it on the podcast, but it reminded me of the ending of Face Off, where they adopt the kid that he's killed their parents, and and then you've got Robert Duncan McNeil as Kevin, who plays Julie's sort of boyfriend. And, there's not much to really talk about. He does his job. Nothing doesn't really stand out very much. You've got probably the most typecast actor of the 80s, Mr. James Tolkien, who plays Detective Lubick. He's also the principal in Back to the Future.
Marty Slacker, I think.
Yeah, and he was in Top Gun as well, I think, as well as a general or something like that. But he's always dependable for that bit of humour. He always plays this sort of straight man who's got to sort of deal with these sort of crazy situations, or he's in a position of authority. Christina Pickles, who plays the sorceress, again, not a great deal to do really. She's just sort of there to be an anchor point for what the heroes of the film were doing. Obviously, interestingly enough, she played Courtney Cox's mum in Friends. She was Judy Geller.
Yeah.
Judy.
I think it's Judy. Yeah.
What's the dad's name? Jack.
Yes, played by
Elliot Gould.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Still one of the funniest characters in Friends ever.
He's good.
Is it the one where they go to London and like, did you? Jack insisted on riding the tube. Judy? That's what they call the subway.
He is particularly good in Friends, actually.
And then what I would consider probably the second best performance in this film, and another one of the villains, Meg Foster as Evil Lynn. I was always fascinated by this Evil Lynn character in this film. I don't know whether it was my sort of young head finding this character a little bit sexy when it shouldn't be, but it's just, again, a sort of almost inch perfect performance because she plays it just right. And amazingly, she doesn't wear contact lenses for this film either. Those are her real eyes.
Wow, that is impressive.
And again, she's got this great look. She plays this sort of almost sort of beaten down sort of underling of Skeletor, and you can tell that she doesn't agree with all of his choices, and he sort of puts her in her place quite a few times. So that there is an interesting relationship between those two in the film all the way through, and she even she gathers up the remaining mercenaries and fucks off basically at the end once he's realising that he's going to get beaten. She doesn't defend him or anything like that, and I think it's just such an interesting sort of villain role in this film. You got Chelsea Field as Teela and John Cypher as Man-at-Arms. Again, they don't have a whole heap to do in this film. I think they're there to sort of represent a couple of characters from the cartoon and from the toy line. They do have probably some of the worst dialogue in the film. The attempt at humour with Teela sort of, shooting a few of the villains and calling herself woman at arms is not the greatest. But they're both fine the role. They look good. They look the part. They're quite reasonably close to the source material. They got Billy Barty as Gwildor, who was a replacement for the Orko character from the cartoons, who was this sort of spirit with a hat on and sort of floated around and stuff. Obviously, in 1987, it would have been very difficult to achieve that special effect. So he was sort of turned into this Gwildor character as this sort of inventor and this sort of scientist within the world of Eternia. And he's the light relief. He's the sort of R2-D2 of this film. A neat little prosthetic as well, although it does, like I messaged you saying, it looks a little bit like one of the Bo Selector masks at certain points during the film.
He's good though. He's a good character. He's a likeable character.
Yeah, he's this sort of little scamp, and he's there. He's an important part of the plot. He's the guy who invented the keys that they're using to travel around, and the main sort of driving plot of the film. And it's a good performance. I think it is a little bit of a shame. I know there's been a bit of controversy recently about them taking the dwarves out of Snow White, and I think the political correctness, as some people would say, it's taken away roles from some of the short actors in recent years, because I think people are a little bit hesitant to cast them in certain types of role. And you think how many films in the 80s used short actors, dwarves, to in big films as well. Whether it's the Star Wars films, Willow, this, Time Bandits, they were important parts of the film, and you don't necessarily get those kind of performances these days, which I think is a little bit of a shame.
Yeah, the only one I can really think of in more recent time, I suppose, would be like Peter Dinklage in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, but I mean, he sort of plays, and not that there's anything wrong with it at all. I'm not saying that he should be playing goofy characters or anything like that, but he plays real life characters, and I think sometimes studios these days will go to the CGI or maybe even use children because they're afraid to cast somebody who's tough as or is affected by dwarfism or anything like that. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because you do a lot of short actors are very good actors and can emote really well through costumes and things like that, and you don't necessarily get as much of that anymore. And you're absolutely right. Peter Dinklage, there should be more there should be more and more real life performances of people who are afflicted by those kinds of things. But we're getting off on a tangent now. And finally, to wrap up, another thing of this part of this film that just fascinated me when I was a kid and slightly freaked me out in a couple of the instances were this group of mercenaries. Now, obviously, the Masters of the Universe toy line was filled with heroes and villains. So you had your good guys, you had your bad guys, and your bad guys were obviously important, or as important as the good guys. And here, we have sort of four main bad guys, or the mercenaries, as Skeletor calls them. The most sort of famous would be Beastman, who appeared in the cartoons and was one of the original in the toy line as well. And then I believe the other three were actually made for this film. They were all new creations. So you got Blade, played by Anthony DeLonghi, who actually was the guy who taught Dolph Lundgren how to fight with a sword for this film, and doubles for Skeletor in the final scene. Then you got Saurod, who's the sort of lizard-looking guy who gets killed quite early on. And apparently this pissed off the design team because they thought they considered them to be the best looking of the mercenaries and the hardest to work on and to get right, and they were really proud of it, and they kill him, 30 minutes into the film or something like that. And he was one of the only ones they'd made a new toy of for just to promote the film. It was actually played by Pons Maar as well, who was the lead wheeler in Return to Oz. We've already discussed on this podcast.
Scary film.
But it was Karg, who's this sort of bat-looking creature with a heavy metal hairdo. It absolutely freaked me out as a kid. Absolutely. And that was mainly because it reminded me of a woman who lived on the estate where I grew up. So it really sort of unnerved me that this and I always, obviously quite unfairly as a young child, I found this woman quite scary just because of her appearance. So when I did see this film, it just sort of bumpered that feeling of being scared of this woman as well, which I hate myself for and saying that, but that's how it was. But yeah, I don't really. I think it's hard to put into words when it's something that's quite sort of personal to you, and you have a fondness for because of where it was in your life when you're growing up.
Yeah.
But I think just as a kid's film, as an action piece, as an adventure story, and all those things that I wanted to see as a kid, you probably would have wanted to see a bit more of Eternia and things like that. But I don't think that would have worked as well. Some of the characters that are integral to the toy line and to the cartoon, like Battle Cat. It's obviously He-Man's cat that turns into a big tiger that he can ride on and things like that. You're never going to get that in 1987. They had to take liberties, certainly, because of budget and because of capabilities in special effects. But I think for what they could achieve, they pretty much achieved it. It grounds the story a little bit, like you said, in taking it to Earth. It gives you something a little bit familiar. The stakes are there. It has comedy. It has the action. It's got decent storytelling. They say there's a couple of bits in there that are quite sort of sickly sweet, but there's real elements of danger. And above all, you've got Frank Langella of Skeletor, which is just fucking epic and it's brilliant. And I will go to bat for this film based on that performance alone. It is fucking amazing. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about Masters of the Universe.
Well, like I said, it was the first time I've seen it. I've not got any kind of nostalgia or memories or anything attached to it, but I still had a great time watching it. It was so 80s, like even the soundtrack, like I think they're in a car at one point and I'm Living in a Box came on.
Yes, well I did.
Great tune.
It did that had never sort of twigged with me before, and I think, going on for, getting older and hearing more of those sort of songs and then revisiting this film, there was a lot more that I sort of picked up on in this film.
Yeah. The stuff about the music was quite interesting because obviously Kevin, Julie's boyfriend character, was a musician, and like using the key as like a synthesizer and then using music to try and fit, like I liked all that stuff. That kind of reminded me, I suppose, a little bit of like Back to the Future and probably Bill and Ted a little bit as well.
Yeah.
They've got that. And it's like, how can we make this as loud and as rocky and stuff as possible? And I really liked that. And even things like the fantasy dance at the school, it was, what was it like, around the world kind of prom, was very 80s because they had these themes like, Under the Sea, and you don't see that kind of thing as much now. I think in Stranger Things, obviously it's set in the 80s, when they had some kind of prom or something, there was a theme like that. So a lot of the 80s...
We don't have that over here, do we? We just at the end of fucking school, you go and get pissed in the park. You don't have a prom and all that shit, or you did.
I think they are now. They aren't.
Yeah.
When we were young, you're right, they didn't. But now they seem to have proms. Well, here in Scotland, they have a prom at the end of primary and at the end of secondary school, and people spend a fortune on dresses and limousines. And it was funny, actually. I was getting my nails done recently, and the girl that was doing them, she had been at her prom, and she was telling me it was a dry prom because obviously there was some people, she was just leaving school to go to university, but there was some people who were 18, but obviously there was some folk that were still 17, so they decided to have this dry prom. And I was like, surely that didn't work. And she was like, no, everybody had like bags of alcohol like strapped to their bodies and stuff. So that's how they do it in Scotland. They don't have like non-alcoholic punch. Everybody's pissed before they get there. But a lot of these things we have kind of borrowed now from. But no, I thought it was overall, sorry, going off on a tangent there about proms, but overall, as somebody that hasn't seen it before, watched it for the first time, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it had loads of different elements that I enjoyed. You're right, there was a wee bit of a kind of sickly sweet ending, but apart from that, I thought it was just a really tight. I wasn't bored at all, and even the performances that maybe weren't as good were still decent. There wasn't anybody that I thought they're awful. I thought the story was good, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'd watch it again. And I think it's a shame it didn't do well at the box office, actually, because it's the type of thing, given especially as well how popular He-Man was, I'm quite surprised it didn't do well at the box office. That is a bit of a shame, because you might have had more Masters of the Universe films had it been a success.
Quite possibly. I just don't think... I think the trouble is that it was, the toy line was started in 1981.
Yeah.
The cartoon was 83. This is another 4 years after that, and it's right at the back end. And I think they thought the movie was designed to sort of save the toy line. So if the sales are declining on the toys, then a movie at that point isn't necessarily going to save the toy line, because people are already not interested in the toys if they're not buying them as much, which is a shame, like you say. But obviously, if we were in a predicament now where we had to return to Eternia and remember the little theme tune that's on the key, could you do it after watching the film once, like Kevin?
I could not. It just sounded very 80s and very synthy, but no, I could not.
Well, okay, so we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and discuss your choice. Okay, so welcome to the intermission. So this is part of the episode where I ask my co-host a random question, a question they've not prepared for, and get their honest first answer. So, Vanessa, are you ready?
I don't know, because I always freak out at these, because I'm never
okay, so what is the best movie soundtrack?
Reservoir Dogs had a really good soundtrack. I used to listen to it a lot. Do you know what? I'll go for something not recent. I'll go for something that I really liked when I was younger, and I listened to the soundtrack constantly. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, that is a good one. I'm not a massive fan of that film, but the soundtrack is pretty fucking epic on that film.
There's so many good songs. Garbage. There's the Cardigans. There's a lot of really good 90s music, and I bought that soundtrack as whatever age I was when I saw Romeo and Juliet. I did like the film. I quite like Baz Luhrmann, and we got taught Romeo and Juliet at school, and they showed us the version with what's her name? Is it Margot Kidder that was in it? And it's pretty boring, pretty shit. So then when I saw the Baz Luhrmann one, it was so much more exciting visually. And I'm not a big Shakespeare fan. My mum used to be an English teacher, and I think that's possibly why I was put off Shakespeare. But I like Baz Luhrmann. I like the way he did it. I just thought the soundtrack for that. I'm sure there's loads. If I sat down and thought about it, there'd be loads of other synths that are probably absolutely banging. Like at the Guardians of the Galaxy films, for instance, have good soundtracks. Some of the Marvel stuff have really good soundtracks, but I'll go with Romeo and Juliet by Baz Luhrmann. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd find it hard to pin one down, I think. But you mentioned Reservoir Dogs. That's a really good one. Pulp Fiction, a lot of Tarantino ones, really. Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels. That's pretty epic. Snatch. A lot of early Guy Ritchie ones had banging soundtracks. But I probably just edge it for me would be Trainspotting.
Oh, of course, that's good.
Because it's got a lot of low-key bangers on it, not stuff that you necessarily... Well, a lot of them do. A lot of the Tarantino ones, most of those songs on the Tarantino soundtracks are famous because Tarantino put them in a film. But, you've got a lot... You've got New Order, you've got... God, who is it who did the Blondie cover on it? Is it not Republica? Fucking hell.
Republica were good though. Remember Republica?
Yeah, I remember Republica. No, it's not them. It's the other ones who did Sleeper. No, it's gone completely out of my head. But yeah, Trainspotting soundtrack is banging. Absolutely banging. If not just for Iggy Pop and Lust for Life.
That is fantastic. There's Chemical Brothers are on it as well. No?
Yeah, there's loads. There's Blur. There's all sorts of good stuff on there. Okay, let's wrap that up and we'll head back to the main episode. Okay, so then we move on to your choice, Vanessa. So obviously this was your choice of subject. So was this a film that you had in mind when you picked this subject, or did you have to think about it?
No, I really wanted to talk about this film. So the film that I picked for best movie based on a toy was 1985's Clue.
Every person in this room has the perfect motive.
Stand back!
For murder.
What do you mean? Murder.
But only one of these suspects is the murderer. Is it the timid Mr. Green?
Why are you screaming? Because I'm frightened of what? Screaming!
Or the militant Colonel Mustard?
If I was the killer, I would kill you next. Huh? Said if.
Mrs. White, who helped her husband on his way.
Well, it's a matter of life after death. Now that he's dead, I have a life.
Miss Scarlet, who's helped many men along the way.
Practice makes perfect. Huh.
Professor Plum, who's looking for a way.
I'm looking.
Mrs. Peacock.
I have absolutely no idea what we're doing here, but I am determined to enjoy myself.
Or did the butler do it?
No.
Paramount Pictures invites you to an evening of mystery.
Let us in! Let us in! Let us out! Let us out!
Murder.
This is getting quite serious.
And madness. In the movie that makes a scene of the crime.
So who did it?
Clue. It's not just a game anymore.
Based on Cluedo. Now, I hadn't done the research that you had, so while you were talking, I looked up Cluedo so I could say a little bit about the background. So Cluedo, as it's known in the UK, known as Clue in North America, is a murder mystery game for 3 to 6 players, and it was devised in 1943 by British board game designer Anthony E. Pratt. It was first manufactured by Waddington's in the UK in 1949. It's been relaunched several times, and it's currently owned by the American company Hasbro, who I think are big hitters in the toy and board game field. So, where do I start with this film? I'll just run through some of the, the director, who's in it and stuff before getting on to why I chose it. So, it was directed by Jonathan Lynn, who is quite a prolific director of kind of comedy type films. Some of the stuff he's got under his belt: Nuns on the Run, The Whole Nine Yards, Sergeant Bilko, and My Cousin Vinny. He's quite a well-known director. And the cast, well, first of all, you've got Tim Curry, who is just amazing in everything that he's in, and I will probably go on and on about how much I love Tim Curry when we're talking about this. You've got Madeline Kahn, Eileen Brennan, Christopher Lloyd, Michael McKean, Martin Mull, Leslie Ann Warren, Colleen Camp, and Lee Ving. Lee Ving is Mr. Body. So as I said, it's basically Clue is just a film based on the board game, which I'm going to call Cluedo because in the UK we call it Cluedo. And I mean, the plot's crazy, and I can't really do it in a very short, succinct way. So it's just basically all the characters play the characters from Cluedo. So you've got Mrs. White, Mrs. Peacock, Professor Plum, Mr. Green, Colonel Mustard, Miss Scarlet are the main players from the game. And you've also got a couple of additional characters that aren't in the game, and that's Wadsworth the butler, played by Tim Curry, Yvette, who's like the kind of French maid, played by Colleen Camp, and Mr. Body, as we said, played by Lee Ving. And you've also got the cook, whose name I haven't written down, but I don't think she says anything in the entire movie.
Dinner will be served at 8, I think. That's the only thing she says.
Aye.
Yeah, Mrs. Ho, her name is.
Oh, right, okay, she says very, very little. So the film was produced by John Landis, who I don't think really needs an introduction, and was written by Jonathan Lynn, and I think John Landis had something to do with the writing as well, but I think it took a wee while to actually get the story right. And I mean, the plot is crazy, and it actually isn't that important, to be honest. It's not really about the plot, the movie really is about the characters and just how bonkers it is. And the producer, I find quite interesting, is Deborah Hill, which I didn't know, of Halloween fame.
Yeah.
So it's an old Gothic house in New England. I think it's called Hill House. It's set in 1954. Very much reminded me of the house of things like Rocky Horror Picture Show, which obviously Tim Curry was also in. Things like the Old Dark House, any kind of... and then there were none, any of these like older haunted Gothic murder mystery type house. The setup of the house is like the board game, so you've got like billiard room, you've got the study, the dining room, and then basically
even the secret passages lead to the exact same places as on the... They
do.
On the board.
I read that the actual set design is really smart because it is very much like the board. And you've got at one point in the movie, they're all given presents, and the presents are the weapons from the board, which I've written down somewhere, and I'm not going to be able to find it now. Let's see if I can do it from memory. The candlestick, the rope, the lead pipe, the wrench, a knife and a gun, I think. So I was obsessed with Cluedo when I was younger. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, I love murder mysteries. I used to watch Murder, She Wrote with my gran. When I got older, I love stuff like Jonathan Creek. I still, maybe not so much now because it has been done to death, but I still love murder mysteries. But when I was in primary 7 at school, I actually had a birthday party where it was like a murder mystery based on Cluedo. So everybody came as a character. And I was raging because I wanted to be Miss Scarlet, because Miss Scarlet was always the sexy one. But I had dark hair, and my friend she was very blonde.
Right.
And she was like, no, I should be Miss Scarlet because I'm blonde and blah, blah, blah. So I ended up being Mrs. White because my maiden name is White. That's what my name was before it was Cordner. But I wrote like a whole script and everything. And it was really good. Like I was quite... For being like 12-year-old, I did very well. So I've always loved Cluedo. I always loved like.
Did you ever? Can you remember watching the TV series?
Very vaguely. Was it BBC?
I think so. Yeah, and it was like sort of they had actors, didn't it? And the whole point of the episode was you had to guess who it was that had done it, and it was sort of. I seem to remember it being sort of. That you got sort of little clips, didn't you? And then they went to people who were guests who sort of tried to decipher it. And then at the end, it was revealed, obviously, whoever did it. I think Nicholas Parsons was Reverend Green in it for one of the series or something like that.
Well, that's the thing, yeah, because in the movie, they call him Mr. Green, but it was Reverend Green when he was on the board. It's probably pertinent to point out at this point, because I don't think we have, I could be wrong, but I don't think we have any other X-Files connections.
We don't know. No,
So
it's only in this film.
We have a X-Files connection because obviously Michael McKean, big well-known actor, but I know him best as Maurice Fletcher from X-Files, who's in the fantastic two-parter Dreamland. I think most people probably know him more from This Is Spinal Tap and recently Better Call Saul. That he was in.
Oh, right, he's in that.
Yeah, he's a really big character in that. He's a great actor. Like, he's the type of person I love him in absolutely everything that I see him in. And so, yeah, that gets the obligatory X-Files mention out the way. And if you haven't seen Dreamland, two-parter of X-Files, I highly, highly recommend it because it's hilarious. And he is a really funny actor. He's a really, really good comedy actor, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, as I said, I try and kind of do a synopsis. It's so difficult, but essentially, they all gather at this house. It transpires that nobody really knows who invited the main characters. So that's like the 6 characters from the board game. And Mr. Body, shockingly, is murdered. The lights go out at one point. He's murdered, although he actually isn't really dead, and he gets murdered again, bizarrely. The cook's murdered. The French maid is murdered.
I'm sorry, but you keep saying murdered, murdered, and it's very Taggarty.
There's been a murder. And then, obviously, it's just about, really, who killed who. And
I think it is. It's about the characters, isn't it? It's all about the characters in this film.
It is about the characters because it's really like a caper movie. It's like an old-fashioned caper movie where everybody's just running about, overacting. It's absolutely mental. At one point, a singing telegram rocks up. She gets murdered as well.
Yeah.
She's I think she's the one that plays Joan of Arc in the Bill and Ted movie.
Oh, is she?
I think so.
I know she was. I remember reading somewhere that she was in a band, I think. Yes. She was in the Go-Go's, that's it. And yes, she was, Joan of Arc in...
Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
Another great 80s movie, which I think we've already mentioned when we were talking about Masters of the Universe. Obviously, this one actually came out this was only 2 years prior to Masters of the Universe. The first time I saw this, I can't remember it, like, exactly the way that I can in some films where I'm like, oh, I know exactly when I first saw this, but I'm pretty sure it was a Sunday afternoon movie. I think it was on like a Sunday afternoon, and I happened to catch it, and I thought it was the greatest thing, that I'd ever seen.
I can't remember when I first watched it. All I know is that me and my sister watched and watched and watched and watched and watched this film.
It's just, it is perfect. It's so...
Sorry.
Bold statement, I know. But it's so much fun. And Tim Curry is just... I suppose one of the reasons I love Tim Curry is this movie. I'm sure I've mentioned to you before, I don't know if I've said it in this podcast, but It by Stephen King is my favourite book. And Tim Curry as Pennywise in the miniseries, which has loads of problems, but I still really like because of probably when I saw it. It's fantastic in that. He's amazing, obviously, as Frankenfurter in Rocky Horror, Darkness and Legend, the part he plays in Home Alone 2, the concierge. Like, Tim Curry was a big part of my kind of formative years. Like, he was in all of these films, and in this, he's like Tim Curry on speed.
Yeah.
Like, it's like so... Like, and apparently it was actually quite stressful for him playing this character because he was all over the place constantly and chatting at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Well, he's the driving force of the film, isn't he? Everything goes through him. He's almost sort of the physical narrator of this film. He's everything's going through him. Everything is being told by him, and he's directing the traffic almost. So it's all on his shoulders, but he does it so well and manages to be, as funny as everybody else in this film.
It's a great ensemble cast, I think. Not one of them is weak. And I mean, you've got people like Christopher Lloyd, and Christopher Lloyd, I mean, he's a massive actor, but he doesn't, I don't know, I suppose, was he as big an actor at the time as he is now in 1985?
Well, this is after, or it's around the same time as Back to the Future was 85, when it was 84.
It was 84 or 80, maybe it was 84, I think.
But I think before that, you know, he'd been in Taxi, and he'd been in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and all that sort of thing, but he wasn't maybe the household name that he's gone on to become. That's maybe a good place to start, sort of, really, with this film, is going through some of the cast, obviously, with Christopher Lloyd. I mean, one thing for me that struck me with Christopher Lloyd, I can't remember seeing another performance like this from him, where he's playing this sort of is this obviously lechy character who's got very loose morals when it comes to his patients and stuff like that. But he made it believable, definitely.
I thought he was brilliant, and it's funny seeing him playing a kind of lecherous character, because it's not really what he's normally cast as. Madeline, is it Can? She's
my favourite, absolute my favourite. I mean, you know, she's great in Blazing Saddles as well, but this will always be the film I will remember. Madeline Conform. It's still my favourite moment of the whole film.
I think I know what you're going to see.
I read somewhere that it was improvised as well, where she's revealed to have killed Yvette, and it's just like flames from the side of my hair. It's just fucking brilliant.
That is
just little moments from her. You know, there's a bit where they're looking at the negatives of, I think it's Colonel Mustard and Yvette. Mm-hmm. When they're looking at Yvette, she says, nobody can get in that position, and Professor Plum sort of cocks her leg up and bends her across this sofa, and she's just, get him off me.
She's so good at one point as well. She says something like, life after death is as improbable as sex after marriage. She's just so funny. And that flames on the side of my face thing, I didn't know that was improvised. It was only after I started looking up some of the trivia and stuff. And as you say, that's probably the best bit in the whole movie. She's so over the top. She's just absolutely brilliant.
And flies are where men are most vulnerable. That's a fucking classic line. Absolutely classic line.
Yes, she's absolutely brilliant. So who else have we got? We've already touched on Michael McKean, but I think he's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I again, you know, it's such a consistent performance from him, because he's, you know, and the absolute best line of his is when Wadsworth's sort of revealing what everybody's getting blackmailed for, and he sort of goes through this stuff that he works for, whatever, his State Department or something like that, and he's like, and I'm a homosexual, and sits down, and Wadsworth's just like, that's not in here. It's not fucking...
Yeah, I must admit, I found that, but I don't know if it's just maybe of the time.
Yeah,
because
it is.
Later on, at the very end, he says, I'm going home to sleep with my wife. And I was like, are you saying that because you weren't really a homosexual, because you were undercover and that was part of being undercover? Or are you saying that because you're pretending that you've got a wife? But either way, that probably wouldn't work, I don't think, in a film these days. You've got to view it, I suppose, when it was made. But I thought
it's that sort of, it's that, you know, this film's set in the 50s when, you know, it was probably illegal at that point in America. I'm pretty sure it was, and would have made people extremely uncomfortable to know that there was a homosexual in their presence, or certain people certainly would have been. And I think it's just that comedy of making people uncomfortable that sort of works with that character, whether it's right or wrong. But yeah, you know, I mean, the amount of times he says I didn't do it, and just the different ways that he says I didn't do it, is just brilliant. And then obviously one of the endings that we get, which I'm sure we'll get onto, is, you know, I told you I didn't do it.
Yeah, he's brilliant. As I said, I think he's always dependable. I think Leslie Ann Warren as Miss Scarlet is brilliant.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, she's a great actress and just so believable in the part. Again, quite funny as well. Another really good comedy actor, I think.
Well, there are quite, for the sort of PC characters that there are in this film, which again, it is of its time. You've got a good couple of strong sort of female characters. I think for one, Miss Scarlet, and I think Mrs. White is reasonably strong from my point of view. They're not just the typical sort of female characters, especially not that you would see coming out of something set in the 50s. They're very sort of capable and hold their own. They're very sort of, Miss Scarlet's very sassy, and she doesn't take any shit off any of the guys lecturing at her, kind of thing.
Yeah, she's brilliant, and that just leaves, I think, Martin Mull as Colonel Mustard. He's great.
It's brilliant. It's just so, I mean, you would expect the Colonel to be the most sort of sound of them all, and the one who's got everything together, but it's just every turn he's just made to look an absolute tit. Whether it's that, I don't need you to make a fool of me. I can do that perfectly well by myself, or something like that.
Yeah, he's absolutely brilliant. I thought Colleen Camp as a vet, the maid.
Colleen Camp is incredible.
Yeah.
She's obviously extremely attractive.
Very, very, yeah.
And not to sound too, hopefully this doesn't sound too chauvinistic, but a cracking cleavage.
It has to be
that is not lost on how many times, just everybody's staring at a cleavage. Even the women in this film are staring at a cleavage, and it's just constant. There's the point where Mrs. Peacock even is like, just can't stop looking. It's just absolute comedy gold about, I mean, it's, yes, women shouldn't have men just ogling at their cleavage, but it's just so out and out obvious, and they're just jaws are dropping to the floor kind of thing, and it's just comedy gold, absolute comedy gold.
Though, it's not just the men, it's it's the women as well that keep looking at her cleavage, and so it's not done in a completely exploitative way, because the women are also like constantly and I think she's gorgeous, but she plays the part so well. And then I think the only one we've maybe not touched on of the main cast would be Eileen Brennan as Mrs. Peace.
Oh, brilliant. She is absolutely brilliant. I know I read somewhere that she was sort of coming off painkiller addiction or something at this point in her career.
Yeah.
But she's just a massively capable comedic actress. I think the only thing I've seen her in probably before this was Private Benjamin, and then later on she was the crazy cat lady in Jeepers Creepers as well. But in this, she's just comedy gold, absolute comedy gold.
There's not really a weak link. I mean, obviously, as we said, that the actor that plays the cook doesn't really say very much, and obviously leaving as Mr. Body is an odd choice because he looks so shady. I mean, he just looks like a gangster. Which, and I don't know, I suppose, does that really work? But I think he's pretty good as well. It's just a bit strange because he looks like such a shady character.
Well, again, I think like the Singing Telegram, he was a singer in a punk band, I think, or something like that.
Right, okay.
There is a reason for his casting, but I can't remember quite what it is. But he does his job really well. He looks quite sort of menacing, and he's probably the weakest sort of acting link in the film. He's obviously not had a lot of experience.
Yeah.
But shout out as well, actually, because you've got of the people that are sort of murdered, you've got Jeffrey Kramer, who played the motorist, who was Hendrix in Jaws, the sort of sheriff's deputy.
Oh, right, okay.
In Jaws, he was the only other sort of shout out I'd give in this film. And Howard Hessman as well, who plays the sort of chief, the evangelist who knocks at the door.
Oh yeah, he's good.
He was, I think I can remember him from his, he plays Commandant Lassard's brother in Police Academy 2.
Right.
But yeah, it's an epic cast, really.
Oh, the cast, like you said, the cast makes it because the actual story is crazy. And then you've got these multiple endings. And apparently, when the film was first shown in theatres, like Masters of the Universe, it didn't bomb, but it didn't really do that well. It's definitely got much more a cult following since. And I think one of the reasons for that was because they showed different endings depending on what showing of the film you went to see, which doesn't really work. I think it works best now when you watch it streaming or you watch the DVD or whatever, and you get, is it the three? I think there's three different endings. You get the here's how it could have happened, here's how it could have happened, but here's how it really happened. And actually, the way that it really happens, the final one is probably the one that makes the most sense because it turns out that effectively the butler did it, which is like the kind of cliche of like murder mysteries anyway. And then you've got the stuff obviously about, is it Mr. Green? Or is it Mr. Green? Michael McKean being the, or is it Colonel? Forgotten who's who now. Mr. Green being obviously the FBI plant.
Yes.
And there's all this stuff that's quite interesting as well about like McCarthyism and all that stuff that's quite serious. So in something that's really a bit of a caper, a comedy, you've got all this stuff about, you know, the House of Un-American, can't remember what you called it, you know, the name and name stuff, which was an awful kind of part of American history, and something that, you know, was really serious, kind of woven into it, which it makes it quite interesting as well.
But then it is every ending has the line, communism was just a red herring.
Which is fantastic.
It's lovely, like the J. Edgar Hoover's on the phone. Why is J. Edgar Hoover on your phone? Well, he's on everyone else's. Why should he be on mine?
Right, and it's quite funny actually that Michael McKean's character is the FBI plant, because obviously if you do watch the X-Files and you know his character in the X-Files, he is this shady government character in that as well. But yeah, I think it's just, as you say, the performances make it, the plot, I mean, I wrote pages and pages on the plot, but you couldn't really summarise it. It's just really a murder mystery with 3 different endings. But I think the performances, the comedy in it just make it, and it's really atmospheric because it does have that old gothic house with people getting murdered, and you've got like the Rottweiler dogs. I think there's a storm and the phone gets cut out. And
people thinking they can smell dog shit will never not be funny, as you know. That keeps going for the first 5-10 minutes of the film. You know, obviously Tim Curry standing in dog shit, and then everyone can smell it when they come in.
It's just daft as well, because like, see if you explained that to somebody, they probably would be like, how's that funny? Like the bit with the telegram as well, like it's so funny. Like she's like, you're singing telegram, bang. Like, again, if you explained it to somebody, I don't think somebody would necessarily find it funny, but it works so well.
And it's that point of the film, isn't it, where the cops died, the motorists died, the Mr. Body and the cook have already been killed, and the vet's been killed, and at that point they're just going with it, and they're like, they just couldn't give a shit, and they open this door and the telegram's just laid there, and they're like, oh right, okay, and they just carry on. It's fucking, the whole of this film is just incredibly funny.
It is. It's especially when you're young. Like, I mean, I still find it hilarious watching it now. But when I don't know, I couldn't tell you honestly what age I was when I first saw it, but I would imagine I must have been about like 12 or around about 12-year-old. And I just thought it was one of the funniest things that I ever.
Well, that's it. You know, this is a PG film, and it deals with a lot of issues around sex and prostitution, even at points. And you know, it's a very sort of bawdy comedy in that sense. But it's the way it gets around it, and these are words that you sort of pick up at that age and not knowing what they are, like stupping and what's the other way? Fragrante delecto. And you just like you don't know what they are at a certain age. When you watch it when you're younger, it just sounds funny. But then obviously it makes even more sense when you get older and you realise what some of those lines and some of those sort of jokes are about. Really, it's just it's incredibly funny.
Like the stuff about the McCarthyism as well. Like when I watched that as a 12-year-old or whatever age I was, I wouldn't have understood any of that. Yeah. And now watching it, I'm like, oh God, that's quite a serious issue. But of course, it was a thing that was happening in the 50s, and people were naming names. I mean, I think there was a lot of actors and stuff involved in that stuff, and it was like. But as you said, then you've got the stuff about the communism was a red herring, which is hilarious. And again, I probably wouldn't have got that joke. I probably would have got it in one sense, because obviously as a fan of murder mysteries, there is always a red herring. So I would have been like, oh, that they're being quite self-aware, saying it's a red herring in a murder mystery, but then actually now understanding what communism is. Like, funny.
Yeah. Well, it's like the line, I would never have got it when I was younger, but when obviously Wad was telling them about his wife who committed suicide and everything, and he says, my wife had friends who were socialists, and everyone's fucking love it. Great, absolutely great.
It is. It's just, as you said, it's just such a joyful film. It's the type of thing I can put on, as a comfort movie. If I'm not feeling good, or like I just want something to cheer me up, like I always finish it like with a smile on my face, because it's just so funny and so much fun and so whimsical as well. But I had a look about some kind of like trivia and stuff. So there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. Apparently, it's one of Tim Curry's favourite movies that he did.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably because he was so proud of his performance, because he does have to do so much, especially at the end when he is running from room to room, talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I think he's quite proud of it. And like, given all the films that he did do, that's quite a bold statement. But I found that quite interesting. Carrie Fisher was supposed to play Miss Scarlet until really close to they started filming, but she ended up in rehab for drug addiction just days apparently before filming. And I think it would have been quite interesting seeing her as Miss Scarlet, but I think Leslie Ann Warren does a brilliant job, so I wouldn't want to take anything away from her.
She was actually, when I was reading up on the trivia and stuff, I didn't realise that Leslie Ann Warren was married to John Peters, who was married to Barbra Streisand at one point as well. Who was this Hollywood hairdresser who became a movie producer.
Right.
And if you want to learn more about John Peters, watch a film called Licorice Pizza, which was a Paul Anderson film, came out last year. I'll say nothing more than that. Watch that, because Bradley Cooper plays John Peters, and it's just a fucking sight to behold. It's absolutely brilliant, but I'll say no more than that.
I'll need to check. I have heard of Licorice Pizza. I've just never seen it, so I'll need to check that out. What else did I see about it? Oh, there was something about whether Mr. Body was cast, because it's like Mr. Body will be leaving soon.
Yes, yeah.
So I do think that's true. Obviously, what the actor's name was, but I thought that was pretty funny.
That might be the reason, actually. I think that's why. Yeah, I think that's what I read. Yeah.
And another I think a couple of them we've already mentioned, but another similar movie that Eileen Brennan also starred in was Murdered by Death.
All right, okay.
So it's a movie, what's his name that plays Columbo? Peter
Falk.
But he's in it, she's in it, and there's other people in it that are like famous detectives or whatever from shows, and it's a kind of similar thing where they all turn up at this old house and then people start dying. But it's funny, but it's not quite as daft, I suppose, as this movie. But I've seen that as well, and it's definitely worth checking out. If you like Clue, I think you would really like Murdered by Death. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how much more there is to say about it. It's quite difficult to talk about, because it's quite difficult to talk about the plot, because the plot is so bizarre that actually trying to go through the plot is quite tricky. Even trying to keep up with it when you're watching it, because I suppose the good thing about this film is it doesn't really matter. So at one point I was like, wait a minute, I don't really understand how she could have killed it, but then I was like, that doesn't actually matter. It doesn't really matter how things happen. It's about the comedy, it's about the characters, and then this kind of daft bit at the end where you get these 3 different endings. And I suppose the only sad thing is, at the end, when you realise that the butler did do it, he was the one that was blackmailing them. He wasn't really the butler. Leaving was the butler. I was kind of like, oh, that's sad though, because I like Wadsworth and now he was the right thing. But yeah, I don't know if you've got any more that you want to say about it. I mean, I just think it's just fantastic. I don't think really there's anything wrong with it. And I just, yeah, I mean, I could just...
No, I mean, like I say, I watched this a lot with my sister when I was younger, and it's still, watching it again, 30 years later, it's still as funny, probably even more so as you get older. You get more of the little jokes and things like that, and it's just a great comfort movie, and just nice and funny, and yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, in terms of, if we're going to sort of wrap up the episode and talk about these two films and compare them, they're both very close to my heart, these films, because they remind me, obviously, in the case of Masters of the Universe, they remind me of my sort of personal childhood and me, what I was into at a certain point in my life, and the memories that sort of instills. Whereas Clue, it elicits more memories, but different memories. Watching it and bonding with my sister, and just loving the film, and just that was something that we watched together, and we still sort of quote to each other at various times as well, and we'll still talk about that film together quite fondly. So it's and I think this is one of those occasions in the Movie Duel podcast where I would probably actually concede the episode and say that I think Clue is probably the better film.
Yay! I would say that, but I mean, as I said, I only saw Masters of the Universe the first time a few days ago, and I did thoroughly enjoy it, but it doesn't have all the nostalgia that I have with Clue. And like what you're saying about Masters of the Universe is similar for me for Clue, because I was so into murder mysteries, I was so into Tim Curry, and as I said, I loved Cluedo. I even had a birthday party based on Cluedo, so it ties into a lot of stuff I was into when I was younger. So as much as I can watch it and enjoy it just as being a really funny, good film, it also does evoke a lot of nostalgia for me, the same way probably Masters of the Universe does for you. Having said that, I'm really glad I got to see Masters of the Universe, because it's not the type of film I would have sought out. It's not particularly easy to stream either. I was able to get it on a free trial for MGM through Prime, but it's not the type of thing that pops up on Netflix or Prime or any of the big streaming services.
No.
So, sometimes things will pop up and you'll go, oh, I've never seen that. That sounds like my cup of tea. It maybe because it didn't do as well, and it's maybe, I mean, has it got a cult following now the way that...
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, but I think that's probably more people who were, similar to me, who grew up playing with He-Man figures and stuff like that. And I think they're both very culty films.
Yeah,
definitely. They obviously didn't do well at the box office. They didn't necessarily do great critically either. But they obviously struck a chord with a certain type of people and a certain generation, I suppose. And yeah, I think they're both great films. I think when you think about some of the tosh that's come out based on toys like battleships and most of the Transformers films, I mean, the first one's fine. I had no interest in any of them after that. The Michael Bay Transformers films. There's not really much out there. Obviously, Barbie's getting a lot of attention and a lot of good reviews, which is great. But having not seen it, I don't think it's necessarily it's more of a particular type of film than being faithful to anything in terms of
It's got a message.
the toy. Yeah.
You'll know that without seeing it, just because of the chat about it. Barbie is good. I did enjoy it, but I didn't suddenly think, oh, I'm going to pick that instead of Clue for this choice, because, I mean, maybe I don't have a lot of nostalgia attached to Barbie because I didn't play with Barbies a lot when I was young, but Barbie isn't really about Barbie. It's more got this kind of feminist message, which I like, but it's not. It's more about that, I think, than it is about the toy.
Yeah.
And it was a good film, but personally, I don't know if it was quite as good as I expected it to be. And it was also a little, I say this about so many films nowadays, but I thought it was a wee bit too long. It was about an hour and 50 minutes. And I think there was about 10, 15 minutes in the middle where it does actually lag a little bit. Whereas I think watching this film and watching Masters of the Universe, I think both of them, I wouldn't have that criticism of. I think they're both very well paced, and I wasn't. I mean, obviously, I wasn't bored watching Clue, but I watched Masters of the Universe for the first time, and I'm not saying I was bored watching Barbie. I just think it could have been a bit tighter if it had been shorter. The only other movie I suppose I would have possibly thought about before we spoke, and I don't know if it's really based on a toy line as such, but obviously Toy Story is, in my opinion, one of the best Pixar movies. Toy Story 3 might be my favourite, but I suppose you theoretically for this, could have picked Toy Story because the majority of the toys in Toy Story are toys that do exist. The movie.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, you can't deny that Toy Story is an amazing, I mean, I think it's a pretty perfect trilogy, actually, to be fair.
Quadrilogy.
Oh, so it is. I think I did really enjoy the fourth one, but I think the first three were perfect, whereas I think
all four of them are perfect. The fourth is fucking amazing.
We maybe need to have another conversation.
We'll save that maybe for another call. Yeah.
They're ones up. They're the only other films that I possibly would have thought about would be like the Toy Story movies. But for me, Clue has that element of nostalgia that I don't necessarily have with the Toy Story movies, because by the time they came out, I was that bit older. And I think I'm probably more likely to stick Clue on just as a comfort, easy watch than I potentially would with Toy Story.
Well, I mean, the only other slight consideration, obviously, said at the top that Transformers, the movie, was a consideration. It was reasonably close. But the only other one I thought of, and I didn't necessarily realise until I sort of did a bit of research about films based on toys, was Mars Attacks, which was based on a trading card game, which is very good. I don't think it's not a patch on any of those films I considered or Clue at all. But it's one that maybe people wouldn't realise is based on a toy in the first instance. And it has some problems and it drags a little bit, but that was a slight consideration at one point. But yeah, that about wraps us up then for films based on a toy line. So obviously last time you were here, we teased a little side project that's on the horizon for us both. So now might be the perfect time to sort of let the people know what that is.
So, we are starting an X-Files podcast, which will be called the so-called X-Files. And we're hoping that the first episode for that should land in the next month or so.
Hopefully, yes. I think we're gonna record a little introduction episode, aren't we? Just to sort of set the stall out and let people know what we're planning to do with that podcast, but it's obviously it's been a consistent part of the Movie Jaw podcast since pretty much its inception, talking about X-Files connections and such, and myself and Vanessa are both big X-Files fans, so we're relishing the opportunity to talk about the X-Files, and yeah, I'm very excited to get underway with that.
Yes, definitely. Any excuse to talk about the X-Files, to be honest. I mean, I'll talk about the X-Files at the drop of a hat. And as you said, I mean, one of the reasons I suppose I started listening to the Movie Joe podcast, or not one of the reasons I started listening to it, but one of the reasons I kept listening to it was because I did enjoy the X-Files connection section. And yeah, so we're hoping, obviously, as you said, to get an intro episode for that and then explain how that's gonna go going forward. Because as you can imagine, there are a lot of X-Files episodes. I think 240 or something. So
Yes.
yeah, we'll let you know how we plan on covering that. So yeah, really excited to start that off as well.
Very cool. So do you want to just sort of just remind people about where they can find you outside of the Movie Joe podcast and anything that you've done recently?
I'm on Instagram at Vanessa Cordner. I'm on Facebook at Vanessa L. Cordner. I'm on Letterboxd at Vanessa Cordner. Recently, I recorded an episode with Creative Psychopaths on 7, which is already available everywhere you get your podcasts. And I yesterday recorded an episode with the Horror Movie Maniacs. That episode should be dropping fairly soon, but if you want to listen to any of their other episodes, again, they're available everywhere that you get your podcasts, and I would recommend both of those podcasts. They're really good fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I listened to the Horror Movie Maniacs. I listened to a couple of their episodes recently after you told me about it, and they're very, very good. I do enjoy that, as well as Creative Psychopaths. Matt and Mark over at Creative Psychopaths. I would encourage you to head over to there and give them a 5-star review as well. They do love their 5-star reviews as well as their horror sandwiches. So get on over there. You can listen to Vanessa talking about 7 and myself talking about Kill List. And yeah, as Vanessa said, keep an eye out. If you look on the Movie Joe pages on Twitter and on Facebook, we'll add a link to her episode on Horror Movie Maniacs once that drops, so you can have a listen to that as well. And that about wraps us up for Best Film Based on a Toy Line. So it just leaves me to say goodbye, and for Vanessa to say...
Flames on the side of my face.
I love it.